Okay, think back. You're a kid, you're at the beach. Bucket, spade, that whole setup. You've got this like grand plan for the ultimate sandcastle. And sometimes, yeah, you build this amazing tower, it looks great, but other times it just sort of slumps,
Right.
collapses into the sad little pile before you're even done. Well, what if I told you there's some actual pretty serious science behind why that happens? Today, we're doing a deep dive into the surprising science of building the perfect sandcastle. Our mission basically is to figure out the physics that lets them stand up, why they fall down, and get this, how you might even build them underwater. And we're digging into this really fascinating paper from Scientific Reports published back in 2012. The title, How to Construct the Perfect Sandcastle. I just love that scientist studying sandcastle. I knew there had to be some cool stuff hidden there.
Oh, absolutely. It's a fantastic mix of something we all kind of know intuitively from playing around and some pretty fundamental physics.
Yeah.
And like you said, the starting point, as anyone who's tried knows, is water. You
Hmm.
need it.
Right, yeah, that feels obvious. Dry sand is hopeless. It just runs through your fingers. But add just a little bit of water and bam, you can pack it, sculpt it. But why? What's actually going on, microscopically? It can't just be that it gets sticky, can it?
That's hitting the nail on the head. It's not just sticky. The real secret sauce is something called capillary bridges. Hmm. Okay, so picture these tiny penny films of water, right? Forming between the individual sand grains. The way the water curves creates this capillary pressure. And that pressure actually pulls the grains together. It's a real force. This creates what the paper calls a network of grains connected by pendular bridges.
Mhm.
And that network is what gives wet sand its stiffness, lets it hold a shape. Completely different from dry sand, which, like you said, just crumbles. It can hardly support its own weight. Wet sand gets this amazing strength from these microscopic water bonds.
Wow, okay. So miniature water bonds pulling everything together, not just lubrication. That makes way more sense. But speaking of how strong they are, how tall can they actually get? I feel like I read somewhere an old estimate maybe that said the limit was like 20 centimeters. Yeah. And it even said the base size didn't matter, which always felt wrong.
Yeah, you're right to question that. That old estimate, well, the paper says in stark disagreement with what we actually see. I mean, we've all seen pictures, or maybe even built, sandcastles way taller than 20 centimeters, right? Sometimes several meters high. And everyone knows intuitively that a wider base helps. Stability definitely seems to depend on the base radius. So, yeah, it raises a big question. Why were those older models so far off? What were they missing?
Okay, right. So if the old ideas were missing something big, what did this 2012 paper figure out? What's the real reason sandcastles eventually collapse when you build them too high?
Well, they found it comes down to a pretty standard engineering idea, actually. The limit happens when the sand column basically undergoes a buckling transition under its own weight. Think about how engineers figure out if a tall, thin building column is stable, or how, like an elastic rod, if it gets too tall and skinny, just sort of bends and collapses under its own weight, right? It buckles. The fascinating thing here is applying that same kind of large-scale engineering principle to, well, to a pile of sand. It seems chaotic, but the same physics applies.
Buckling. Okay, so it's not just crumbling downwards, it's the whole structure kind of bending and giving way, like a beam failing. That's a totally different picture. And this buckling idea, it led to a really specific formula, didn't it? The paper found the maximum height Hmax scales with the base radius r to the power of 23. So Hmax is proportional to r to the 2/3. It basically means a wider base lets you build much taller, but not quite linearly. And they tested it. Their experiments found the height went up roughly as r to the power of 0.7, which is, I mean, that's incredibly close to the 23 theory.
Exactly. The agreement between the theory and the experiments was really good, very convincing. And this precision also applies to the water content. We talked about needing water, but how much? Turns out the optimum strength happens with a tiny amount of water, like a liquid volume fraction of about 1%. That's the sweet spot. If you add too much more water than that, well, it actually destabilizes the sand. The paper calls it landslides, but we've all seen it, right? The whole thing just turns to mush and slumps down. It's that delicate balance again.
Ah, yes, the dreaded mushy collapse. I know it well. And the researchers, they actually built little sandcastles to test this, used regular beach sand, mixed it carefully with water, put it in PVC pipes, and compacted it. They mentioned dropping a thumper like 70 times for each layer. That's serious compaction.
Yeah.
Then they pulled the pipes away. The paper has pictures. Figure 1 shows these columns standing tall. One was 27 centimeters high with only a 2-centimeter base, and another 60 centimeters high with a 7-centimeter base. Just standing there. That's proof right there.
It really is. And because they could measure the properties of the wet sand, specifically its elastic modulus, which is basically how stiff it is, they could actually use their theory to quantitatively predict those heights they measured, which is huge. It means we can now predict pretty accurately how high a sandcastle could be built, depending on the sand grain size and the base. For example, using typical beach sand values, a cylinder with a base radius of just 20 centimeters, so, maybe dinner plate size,
Yeah.
could theoretically reach a height of about 2.5 meters.
2.5 meters. Wow. It's taller than me.
Right. It's an immense improvement, as the paper says, over that old 20-centimeter guess.
Okay, so for all of us heading to the beach this summer, what are the practical tips from this? The formula depends on the radius to the 23 power, but you also mentioned density and this constant alpha. What's alpha?
Yeah.
And how do we, as builders, make it bigger?
Right. So alpha is basically a factor that relates to the sand's internal strength, its stiffness, and how well it's packed together. And you increase alpha by doing what good sandcastle builders already do instinctively: compaction.
Packing it down hard.
Exactly. The more you compact it, the higher the alpha value, the stronger the sand structure becomes. But here's where it gets really wild. You mentioned density earlier. There's actually a way to dramatically decrease the effective density and therefore build even taller.
Decrease density by using lighter sand. No, wait, you mentioned underwater. Underwater sandcastles. Seriously, how does that even... Wouldn't the water just wash it away or make it heavier? It sounds completely backward.
Sounds backward, I know. But it works if you use special sand, hydrophobic sand that repels water. If you use that underwater, the roles of air and water completely flip. Air becomes the wetting fluid, forming bridges between the grains inside the water. The capillary bridge force is still there. It's the interface that matters. But the big advantage is the effective density. When you immerse regular compacted sand in water, its effective density drops hugely, from about 1.6 grams per cubic centimeter down to maybe 0.6. So effectively, it weighs only about a third as much underwater.
So the hydrophobic sand isn't just repelling water. That repulsion effect actually makes it way lighter when it's submerged. That's mind-bending.
It really is. That huge drop in effective weight is the key. It means the buckling limit is much, much higher. And the technique they describe is pretty clever, too. You mold the parts underwater so they're full of trapped air between the grains. Then, and this is cool, you use a syringe to actually suck out some of that trapped air. This reduces the volume of the fluid, the air, in this case, from maybe 40% down to 10%. And just like reducing water content above water, reducing the air content underwater makes it stronger. The paper concludes this makes it possible to build even more spectacular sandcastles underwater than normal ones.
Incredible. Okay, so let's recap. Building a sandcastle. It looks simple, but it's packed with physics. We've got those tiny capillary bridges giving wet sand its strength. We've got buckling theory, like in real engineering, setting the height limit. That crucial relationship, height scales with the base radius to the 23 power. The magic number for water is just around 1%. Not too much, not too little. And then this completely wild idea of using hydrophobic sand to build even better castles underwater by flipping the physics.
Exactly. And while it's fun to think about for the beach, these findings, they're not just trivial. They have real practical interest for civil engineering and soil mechanics. Understanding how these partially saturated granular materials behave is fundamentally important for building foundations, managing soil stability, all sorts of things. It's another case of, basic science shedding light on complex real-world problems.
Absolutely. So the next time you're packing sand into a bucket, remember you're not just playing. You're looking at a complex system governed by physics and engineering principles, a challenge really, and who knows, maybe even the site of a future hidden underwater kingdom built with hydrophobic sand. Thinking about all this, what's the one thing that really stands out to you about all this amazing science hiding right there in a pile of beach sand?